After much anticipation, the wait is finally over. This is the AMD Radeon RX 9070. Now, this particular model is the Tough Gaming OC from Asus. And unfortunately, at the time of this filming, I do not yet have final pricing confirmation, so I cannot speak to that officially. All I can say is that according to AMD, the 9070 has a starting US MSRP at $549. If I get official pricing details from Asus before the publication of this video, I will add that information in at the end of this video and or attach it to a pinned comment below this video, so stay tuned for the end and check out the pinned comment section. But now let's get on with today's official review of the RX 9070. And here we go. This is the AMD Radeon RX 9070, and again, this is the Asus Tough Gaming OC model. Yes, Asus did send this card out to me for review. However, all thoughts and opinions are my own. I've had the opportunity now to review quite a few tough gaming GPUs and motherboards, and I have to be honest, I do really like the aesthetic of these cards. I think they look absolutely phenomenal, but looks are subjective. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Now, with all that being said, we need to talk about the market positioning of the 9070. According to AMD, the 9070 is meant to go head-to-head with Nvidia's brand new 5070. And now with that being said, I did actually get a 5070 in for review, but it just arrived today as I'm filming this, and so I haven't had a chance to do a dedicated review on that card yet, but I'm going to quickly pop that onto the test bench and squeeze in a couple of benchmarks just to do a head-to-head comparison. And I also have some other benchmarks we could take a look at with the 6950 XT and the 7900 XTX just to see where this kind of lines up. I think a broad range of data will serve everybody well. We have to also keep in mind this is the generation where AMD is introducing FSR4, which is their competitor to Nvidia's DLSS4, which now are both AI upscalers. And so that'll be very interesting to test everything out and see how everything stacks up. Now, with that being said, let's go over what you can expect in today's video. In today's video, you can expect the following. As a courtesy, and as always, I have taken the time to add chapters, aka timestamps, down below for your convenience. Feel free to skip around to the section that is most interesting to you. We will go over all the hardware used for today's testing. We will do an unboxing. We will talk about the specifications of the RX 9070. We will do a couple of synthetic benchmarks and finally get into gaming benchmarks. And then, of course, finish up with my overall final thoughts. Okay, right now on the screen is all the hardware being used for today's testing benchmarks, so feel free to pause it and take a good look at it. I won't waste the time going over every individual component. The information is there for those who are interested. And now, what do you get in the box? Well, obviously, you're going to get the Tough Gaming OC RX 9070. You get one Tough Gaming Velcro strap, one Tough Gaming magnet, one Tough Gaming anti-sag bracket. You get one certificate of reliability. You get one quick start guide, and you get one thank you message. And now let's switch over and start talking about the specifications of the RX 9070, and then of course we'll get into the actual performance of this card. Okay, so the AMD Radeon RX 9070 has 56 compute units with 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 VRAM. AMD says the game clock speed is 2.1 gigahertz with a boost clock speed up to 2.5 gigahertz, but I promise you we can get a lot higher than that. The memory interface is 256-bit with 64 megabytes of infinity cache, and the total board power for the 9070 is 220 watts. However, models like the Tough Gaming OC do allow for you to go a little bit beyond that. And finally, the RX 9070 is based on AMD's RDNA 4 architecture. Okay, so here's what's cool about this card. It's still an Asus Tough Gaming OC, which is something I've already reviewed now here on the channel, and this is just an AMD model of it. And to the best of my knowledge, it does seem like Asus is trying to maintain equal features and equal quality and design between Nvidia and AMD. I did notice one little difference between the Nvidia card and the AMD card. We will talk about that here in just a moment, but for the most part, everything else seems to be exactly the same. You are still getting the premium look and feel of the Tough Gaming card. This card looks and feels like a premium quality card all the way around, and part of the marketing material from Asus is that they are using military grade components. I'll put a couple of descriptions on the screen for your convenience to see what they're claiming to offer in this card. But outside of that, you do still have that tried and true triple fan design. All three fans are Axial Tech fans. All three fans are using dual ball bearings. The two outer fans spin counterclockwise while the inner fan spins clockwise, and Asus claims this will help to reduce turbulence. All three fans will stop spinning when the GPU temps are below 55C, and they will start back up once the GPU temps are above 60C. Once again, this is an overclocked model, so out of the box, it will already boost higher than what AMD claims to offer with the base base specification, Asus is promising a minimum of a 2670 megahertz on the boost clock, which again is higher than what AMD claims. But as noted before, we can push this card even further beyond that, and I will show you that here in this video. Now, something that's very cool here about the AMD card that you will not see on the Nvidia card is that Asus is maintaining that 2 8-pin design. So no 12-volt high power connector. Asus is also maintaining that on the 9070 XT as well. Now, even though it's an 8-pin design, Asus is still maintaining some of their safety features. For example, the Tough Gaming OC does have an LED light on it. That light will light up red if you have not plugged in all of your 8-pin connectors properly. Now, this card does offer minimal RGB lighting. It is concentrated to the right side of the GPU, and it is fully customizable in Armory Crate. The Tough Gaming logo will light up, and on this year's model, Asus added 4 additional light bars to give it a little bit of an extra pop. I'm still torn on how I feel about this design change, but let me know what you think in the comment section down below. And as for the backplate is aluminum, and to the right side, you will see a fairly large vent for extra heat dissipation. Overall, Asus has set the bar very high in terms of thermal capabilities for this GPU, because not only are we talking about the backplate and the 3 fans, but Asus is also using a GPU thermal pad now for pretty much all of their GPUs this generation for both Nvidia and AMD. And the idea behind that is that it should make better contact than something like traditional thermal paste, and therefore lead to better temperatures overall. In addition to that, Asus claims to have an exclusive manufacturing technique, which they refer to as max contact heat spreader. And the short version is that the overall temperatures can be up to 2C lower. In terms of overall size, this card is a 3.1 slot card. And in terms of I/O, this card has 1 HDMI 2.1B port and 3 DisplayPort 2.1A ports, surrounded by a 304 stainless steel bracket. And this is the key difference that I noticed between the AMD card and the Nvidia card. With the Nvidia card, you do get 1 more HDMI 2.1B port. And now it's time to switch over and start talking about actual performance of the card. So this card does have a dual BIOS, and out of the box, it is in the performance mode, which is marked with a P on the card itself. The other operation is the quiet mode, marked with a Q. Now, the main difference is that the performance mode will run colder while being a little bit louder, and the quiet mode will be quieter while running a little bit hotter. Now, I did run some synthetic benchmarks using FurMark, and I used hardware info to monitor the performance of the card in each one of these modes. Now, I ran a 10-minute stress test on FurMark in both the performance mode and the quiet mode. Starting off with the performance mode, you can see the maximum GPU temperature is only 48C. Meanwhile, the GPU memory temperature reaches a maximum of 85C, and the GPU hotspot temperature reaches a maximum of 62C. The GPU fans reached a maximum of 1092 RPM, and the maximum total board power was 238 watts. Now switching over to the quiet mode, the maximum GPU temperature is 56C. The maximum GPU memory temperature is 90C. The maximum GPU hotspot temperature is 72C. The maximum GPU fan speed is 726 RPM. And the maximum total board power is the same 238 watts. Okay, we saw exactly what we expected to see. Performance mode ran colder and had a higher fan RPM, and the quiet mode ran hotter while maintaining a lower fan RPM. However, both modes had the exact same total board power. Now let's switch over and start looking at gaming performance. Okay, so here's the game plan for gaming performance. First of all, we're going to briefly take a look at the brand new FSR 4. I only checked out 2 games, and I'm not comparing it to anything else. I just wanted to see how you activate it, what it looks like, and get a general first impression, and I'm going to share that with you. Secondly, we will then benchmark the 9070 against the 5070, as well as the 6950 XT and the 7900 XTX in both rasterization and in ray tracing. Now, the benchmarks will be limited, but it'll be enough information to give you a holistic picture. And finally, I have to say thank you to Tech Yes City, because without him, I would not be able to test the 5070 because Nvidia never sent me my press driver. So shout out to Tech Yes City. Thank you, man. I really do appreciate it. Okay, so according to AMD, at launch, there will be a little over 30 games supported with FSR 4. Now, the game needs to support FSR 3.0 3.1 to begin with. You have to launch the game and enable FSR 3.1, and then you need to shut the game down, and then you need to go into the Adrenaline software and manually activate FSR 4, or you can simply click the Hyper RX button, which will also automatically activate it. And so if you've done everything correctly and if the game is supported, then when you launch into the game, you can hit Alt R on your keyboard to pull up the Adrenaline overlay, and then you can tell for sure that FSR 4 is in fact active. If it is not active, you will have a yellow exclamation point. Now, with all that out the way, let's take a look at God of War Ragnarok. I'm gonna be honest here, I'm pretty impressed with the overall image quality. I stared at it and I stared at it, and I really didn't see too much of an issue here, but I will be honest, it's pretty late while I'm filming this, so maybe you see something that I don't. Let me know in the comment section below what you think. With my naked eye and not doing a side-by-side comparison, I would say this is probably fairly close to DLSS at this point. However, I will need to do much more extensive testing to definitively make that claim. In terms of latency, I don't have a definitive number, but I was using a mouse and keyboard, and everything honestly felt pretty responsive to me. And looking at Ratchet & Clank, it's a very similar experience. I thought everything looked really great in terms of the overall image quality, and latency was not an issue for me personally. But again, more testing is needed. Now let's switch over and look at rasterization benchmarks. Coming in at 4K, we will compare the 9070 to the 5070. Okay, first up is Call of Duty Black Ops 6. I ran the in-game benchmark. This is native 4K with no upscaling and no ray tracing. And as you can see, the final average for the 9070 is 92 FPS, and the final average for the 5070 is 70 FPS. The final 1% low average for the 9070 is 76 FPS, and the final 1% low average for the 5070 is 51 FPS. That is quite the difference there in terms of overall performance between these two cards. And to be completely honest, the on-screen display for the 9070 is the Adrenaline software, and the on-screen display for the 5070 is MSI Afterburner, and so there may be some differences in terms of certain metrics. And now switching over to 1440p again on the Ultra preset, the 9070 has a final average of 146 FPS versus the 5070's final average of just 109 FPS, and the 9070's final 1% low average is 106 FPS, and the 5070's 1% low average is 77 FPS. The 9070 is significantly faster than the 5070, at least in Call of Duty Black Ops 6, but to be fair, Call of Duty always seems to favor AMD hardware. Let's try something else. Next up is Assassin's Creed Mirage. Again, I ran the in-game benchmark, and this is native 4K on the ultra high preset. And as you can see, once again, the 9070 is definitely outperforming the 5070 with an average of 92 FPS versus an average of 79 FPS. However, the 1% lows are pretty much identical, coming in at 61 and 62 respectively. Now, unfortunately, my capture card was giving me issues trying to capture Assassin's Creed Mirage at 1440p, and so I do not have that data. And so now we'll move on to the next game, which is Forza Horizon 5. Okay, next up is Forza Horizon 5. Again, I ran the in-game benchmark, and this is on native 4K, and this has everything absolutely maxed out. And this does include the extreme ray tracing features. And so because of that, I think that's why we see the 5070 pull just a little bit ahead of the 9070 here, although it's not by much. So if it wasn't for the ray tracing capabilities, then the 5070 would probably be slower. But noticing how close the 9070 is to the 5070, I think that does speak volumes to how much better AMD has gotten in their ray tracing performance. Okay, now we're doing the same test, but at 1440p. And again, the 5070 is faster, but also again, I do think it's because of the ray tracing capabilities, as Nvidia is one generation ahead of AMD. And if you look at it, the 9070 is not exactly that far behind in terms of overall average and the minimum frame rate. By the way, I'm not reporting 1% lows here because the in-game benchmark does not give me that data. Rather, it reports maximum, average, and minimum. And now I want to switch things up and look at the 6950 XT. So we're back in Call of Duty Black Ops 6. Now we're at native 4K on the extreme preset. And as you can see, the 9070 is an improvement over the 6950 XT. And the reason why that I'm including this particular GPU is because number one, I had access to it. Number two, this card was over $1,000 $100 just a few years ago, and it was the absolute best that AMD could offer at the time. And it also has 16 gigabytes of VRAM. So the fact that we have a 9070 outperforming that card now, I think that's pretty impressive. And now here's the same test, but at 1440p. And as you can see, the performance is almost identical. And now let's switch over and run the same test again at 4K, but this time let's test it against the 7900 XTX. Okay, this is native 4K on the extreme preset. And as you can see, the 7900 XTX is still a lot faster than the 9070. But honestly, that's to be expected. The 7900 XTX is the RDNA 3 flagship GPU with 24 gigabytes of VRAM. And in addition to that, this particular 7900 XTX is a Sapphire Nitro Plus. So it's one of the best performing XTXs out there. And AMD even said the 9070 and 9070 XT would be slower than the XTX. And very briefly, here's the same test, but at 1440p. And once again, as you can see, the 7900 XTX is significantly faster than the 9070. And finally, you know we have to talk about Cyberpunk, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to show you the numbers on the screen with Cyberpunk gameplay in the background. Essentially, I ran Cyberpunk at both 1440p and 4K native on the high preset. I did enable ray tracing, I enabled reflections, and I set the lighting to medium. Even though this is not maxing out the game, it is still very demanding. And as you can see, the 6950 XT performs the worst by a mile, but the 7900 XTX almost matches the 5070 perfectly, and the 9070 is actually not too far behind. Next up, I want to briefly talk about overclocking. So Asus does offer a free piece of software with all of their GPUs called GPU Tweak 3, and in that software, you can overclock your GPU. Similar to what I'm showing right here on the screen, you can increase the power slider, you can increase the core clock speed, and you can increase the memory clock speed. Now, after playing around with the settings and figuring out what was stable, I went and retested Forza and Call of Duty. Now, with Call of Duty, I just retested it at 1440p on the Ultra preset. And as you can see, there's times where we're clocking above 3200 megahertz, and the final score here was 155 FPS on average, and the non-overclock version had 146 FPS on average. So I had a 9 FPS improvement from this overclock. And again, with Forza Horizon 5, a very similar story, 1440p, everything maxed out. And once again, there are times where we're clocking above 3200 megahertz with this overclock. And ultimately, I did gain 7 FPS on average, 128 versus 135 FPS. Okay, now let's talk about my final thoughts. So overall, my experience. Well, AMD is saying that this is their best day one driver ever. And I gotta be honest, I think it is, at least for me in my experience. Everything worked. It worked out totally fine. I had 0 issues, 0 crashes. Everything was fine. Honestly, the day one experience with AMD and the 9070 was as good as it could possibly be. So yeah, 0 issues in my experience with the drivers. So I'm going to say no driver issues this time around. FSR4 is honestly looking very impressive to me, and I'm very excited to get to play with it a little bit more. I definitely want to do some more extensive testing, dive a little bit deeper, maybe do some side-by-side comparisons with DLSS. If you're interested in a video like that, let me know in the comment section below. But my early impressions of FSR4 are very, very positive. With that being said, my one criticism here is I don't like how you have to go into the Adrenaline software to activate FSR4, and then it looks for games that have FSR 3.1 enabled, and then you have to turn that on and restart the game. I don't like that. I hope eventually all these games get an update, and just how you go to the in-game menu and pick FSR 3 or 3.1, you can now go and pick FSR 4. I hope that does become the case. Now let's talk about the Asus side of things. So overall, the Tough Gaming OC is a good card. It's a high quality card, and it is an overclocked model out of the box. And out of the box, it is clocking higher than AMD's advertised clock speeds, but I was able to push it even further beyond that. As you saw, we were able to hit 3.2 gigahertz in a couple of instances. Everything was stable, no crashes, and it did lead to a noticeable performance increase in both Forza Horizon 5 and Call of Duty Black Ops 6. You have the Tough Gaming OC, you have the 9070, and you have pricing. Let me break it all down. Number one, do I recommend Tough Gaming or Tough Gaming OC? Yes, absolutely, with a very high degree of confidence. I don't care if you're buying Nvidia or AMD, 5090, 5070, 9070, it doesn't matter. If tough gaming is an option, I do recommend it because I've used it now many times over. It is high quality, it doesn't feel cheap, it doesn't look cheap, and it performs incredibly well. Asus definitely does a great job with the tough gaming models. So I highly recommend tough gaming. Now let's talk about 9070. In a vacuum, yes, I recommend the 9070. And if you're talking about the 9070 versus the 5070, I would still probably lean towards the 9070. The issue, of course, comes down to pricing. As with all things, all the time, it's all about the money, right? And availability. So it doesn't matter how cheap it is if it's not available. We've talked about that here before on the channel. But if it is available, how expensive is it? You know, AMD is sitting there claiming that these cards are going to be $550 and $600. Well, at the time of this recording, I have 3 hours before the embargo lifts, and I still do not know the official price of the 9070 Tough Gaming OC model. I have no idea what the price is. And so I'm sure Asus will let me know that later. I'll come back to the video and update the pinned comment below, so be sure to check that out. But in the meantime, I can't really talk about the pricing of this particular model because I don't know it. But what I can say is this: in a perfect world, if you can walk into a store and buy any card you want at MSRP, then the 9070 is a very hard recommendation because for $50 more, you can get the 9070 XT, which yes, I have. Yes, I'm going to work on a review for it. Yes, I've already tested it. And yes, the 9070 XT is a better card than the 9070. And if it's only a $50 difference, then yes, I think you should pay the extra $50 and get the 9070 XT. The problem is that more than likely in this market, there's going to be a bigger difference than just $50 there. Sure, there will be a couple of models, I'm sure, here and there that will hit that MSRP, okay? But at the end of the day, AMD is not offering a reference model. They're not offering a Founders Edition model. Just like Nvidia with the 5070 Ti, it will be left up to the AIB partners to offer those MSRP prices. My recommendation is, if you're interested in going with AMD this generation, even if it's not a 9070 XT, go for it. Absolutely. I had a great experience. I can recommend the card, and I do think it's a better buy than something like the 5070. I do. With that being said, though, if you have the option and if the price is really only $50 apart, then definitely go with the 9070 XT. Anyway, look, that's all I got for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do me a favor and hit that like button because it goes a long way in helping me out. If you're new, get subscribed and let me know in the comment section below, what GPU are you most excited for? Until next time, E-Rock out.